Hi, my name's Mark Woodward, and my wife Laura and I are in Oregon in America.
Hi.
We've been here for about a month. Before that we were based in the UK, and I was working in the mobilization department in recruitment for a couple of years. Now we're in Oregon in America, and before we were in the UK, I was working in Tanzania doing something called language assessment or language survey. And so Phil just asked me to explain a little bit about what that is. It's basically working with language communities, helping them to answer questions about what languages are spoken in an area, what different dialects are there, what other languages continue to be spoken, all these kinds of things which are really important to answer before any Bible translation project or language development project is started. And so helping people to know, is the language of this area the same as the language of this area? Can people use the same resources? Can people use the Bible, the same Bible? If there are different dialects in this one language, which is the best one to translate the Bible into, so that everybody can understand and accept what is produced as being their language, the real language? And so that's basically what language assessment is. Why is this necessary? Do the decision makers not already know these things? Do church leaders and community leaders not already know what the language situation is? Well, yes and no. Often people do know to a high degree, but often there are different opinions. If you think about in the UK, the situation with English, there are lots of different dialects of English, and often people would disagree. What is the best dialect to produce a Bible in English? Should it be the language of the South, or is it the funny language of the North, or maybe what those people speak over in Wales, that or whatever? What's the best dialect to use? And even in your room there, I'm sure there are different opinions, and probably quite strong opinions, because language really goes to the heart of our identity. And so yes, often leaders and decision makers do know these things, but they may have different opinions. Also, the decision makers are often from majority groups. The larger groups, from the larger languages, and often are not so aware of the minorities. So often, if you think about the UK again, a lot of decision makers in the UK church would be English speakers from England, might not know a lot necessarily about native Welsh speakers or about Ulster Scots. They might say, oh, that's just a funny way of speaking English, which is something I heard from somebody a few months ago. And so often the decision makers don't necessarily know about the minority languages, even spoken relatively close. And I think that's the same around the world. And so one of the key things about language assessment is going and talking to lots of different people from different areas, asking them questions, helping them to compare the language spoken in different areas, and helping them to see how can a project best go ahead, and really especially talking with minority people whose opinions might not otherwise be heard in the decision making process. One quick story just to illustrate, I think, for me, why it's so vital. What can happen if language assessment isn't done initially? We were asked in 2004 to survey the Fipa people of the southwest of Tanzania, and a Fipa New Testament had been published about 20 years ago, and it had been coordinated by a Dutch lady who'd been living there for about 50 years, and she'd been working with two translators, one from the northern dialect and one from the southern dialect. And we took this Bible translation, this New Testament, around to different villages to try and investigate why was it not being used. And people read it for the first time often, and they said, this is strange. This Jesus, he speaks like somebody from the north, and then the next sentence he speaks like somebody from the south. It's very strange. and it's just not real. It's not our language. It doesn't sound natural, and it just really brought home to me the fact that these guys had been working on this translation for years, for decades even, and ultimately their work wasn't being used, and people weren't engaging with the Bible, and it wasn't changing lives, not because they hadn't done a good job necessarily, but just because the research hadn't been done initially, and they hadn't investigated the language situation, basically, how people feel about their language, what the differences are, and ultimately the language of where is the best to use in the Bible so that everybody can understand and accept it. So I think that's really why I think language assessment is so important. And it's really going and listening to the opinions of lots of different people, especially minorities who might not be heard, and then bringing that information to the decision makers so that they can make wise decisions about potential translation projects, and ultimately so that people will engage with and be changed by the Bible as they read it in the language that they really feel is their own. So yeah, that's why that's a little bit about language assessment, something that I'm really excited about. And yeah, so hi to anybody there who we know. Hi from Oregon. It's cold and grey today, so pretty much like England, although we don't have any snow, so which I hear you guys might have. Hope you're all doing well, and have a nice day.